Fear is one of the strongest emotions in the human mind. It can protect us, or destroy us. But some people do not fear. Some people control fear, and some are addicted to it. Tonight, Criminal Mind Files opens a classified case that shocked the United States and exposed one of the darkest criminal minds ever documented. This is not just a murder case. This is a psychological nightmare. A story about manipulation, obsession, and power. The suspect looked ordinary, spoke normally, lived normally. Neighbors described him as quiet. Coworkers described him as polite. Friends described him as forgettable. No one suspected that behind that normal face was a predator. The case began in a peaceful American town known as Raven Creek. Low crime rate, quiet streets, safe neighborhoods. A town where nothing dangerous was supposed to happen until people started disappearing. At first, police believed they were unrelated incidents. A runaway, a missing adult, a person who left voluntarily. But something felt wrong. There were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no clear witnesses, just silence and unanswered questions. Then investigators noticed a disturbing pattern. Each victim lived alone. Each victim stayed active late at night. Each victim had recently reported a strange feeling of being watched. Someone was observing them, studying them, tracking their routines. This was not random violence. This was planned. This was organized. This was deliberate. The predator was patient, calm, and extremely careful. To him, the crime was not the goal. The process was the goal. Watching fear grow, watching panic build, watching control tighten. Investigators later said they were not hunting a criminal. They were hunting a mind without empathy, without guilt, without fear, a mind built for manipulation. And this was only the beginning. Because the first confirmed victim would reveal something far more terrifying than anyone expected. The killer wasn't just hiding. He was playing a game. And Raven Creek was his playground. In the next part, we reveal the first victim's final night. And the moment investigators realized they were dealing with a true predator. The first confirmed victim was a 26-year-old graphic designer named Evan Carter. He lived alone, worked remotely, kept a quiet lifestyle. Friends described him as creative, calm, and cautious. He had no known enemies, no criminal history, no dangerous connections. On the surface, he seemed like an unlikely target. But the predator did not choose victims randomly. He chose them for psychological reasons. Weeks before his disappearance, Evan told friends that he felt someone was watching him. He mentioned strange phone calls, silent breathing on the line, no one speaking. At first, he thought it was a prank. Then it escalated. Anonymous text messages began arriving. Short, vague, disturbing. Messages like, "I see you. You look afraid. You're interesting." Evan started documenting everything. Screenshots, call logs, dates and times. He sensed danger, but he didn't understand how close it really was. On the night he disappeared, security cameras captured him, returning home at 11:47 p.m. He unlocked his door, entered his apartment, and vanished. There was no forced entry, no overturned furniture, no visible signs of struggle. Only his phone, left on the kitchen counter. Unlocked. Open. The last message on his screen read, "Are you scared yet?" Detectives reviewed Evan's laptop and discovered something chilling. He had been researching stalking behavior, predatory psychology, serial offender patterns. He knew he was being hunted. He just didn't know by whom. The autopsy report would later confirm that Evan had been held captive for several days before his death. During captivity, the killer recorded audio, not of violence, but of fear, breathing, whispers, pleading. The predator wasn't just committing murder. He was collecting emotions. He was studying terror, like a scientist studies a specimen. And Evan Carter was only the beginning, because investigators soon realized there were more victims, more disappearances, more hidden patterns, more fear, and a killer who was growing more confident with every crime. In the next part, we uncover the secret pattern that linked the victims, and the first real clue that brought investigators closer to the predator's identity. As investigators dug deeper, they realized Evan Carter was not an isolated case. There were other missing persons across Raven Creek and neighboring towns, different ages, different professions, different lifestyles. At first glance, nothing connected them, but when detectives mapped their routines, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every victim had been active online late at night. Every victim used location-based apps. Every victim had recently searched for topics related to fear, crime, or personal safety. It was as if the killer wasn't just watching people in real life. He was watching them, digitally, their social media, their habits, their late-night activity. The predator knew when they were awake, when they were alone, when they were most vulnerable. He selected victims based on psychological behavior, not weakness, curiosity, anxiety, loneliness. The killer didn't break into homes. He was invited in, he manipulated, he gained trust, he created comfort, then he created fear. Detectives recovered deleted chat logs from multiple victims. Each conversation followed the same pattern: a stranger appearing online, friendly at first, calm, charismatic, then slowly turning personal, asking questions about fears, nightmares, insecurities, learning emotional pressure points. This wasn't impulsive violence. This was psychological hunting. The predator built emotional connections before physical control. One detective later said, the killer was not chasing bodies. He was chasing reactions: fear, panic, submission, and the more fear he created, the more powerful he felt. But one victim left behind a critical mistake that the killer never noticed: a hidden recording, saved secretly, buried in cloud storage, a recording that contained the predator's voice, and that voice would soon become the key to unlocking his identity. The recovered recording was only 27 seconds long, but it changed everything. A calm male voice, controlled, steady, almost comforting. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't angry, he sounded amused. The victim could be heard breathing rapidly, terrified, trying to stay quiet. Then the voice whispered, "Fear is beautiful, don't waste it." Audio forensic experts analyzed the recording. They filtered background noise, enhanced tone patterns, isolated breath rhythms. Behind the voice, there was a faint sound, a ticking clock, a low-frequency hum, and a distant train horn. Investigators began reconstructing the environment: a basement, soundproofed walls, minimal echo, controlled acoustics. This wasn't an improvised crime scene. This was a prepared space, a place built for psychological control. Detectives cross-referenced missing person timelines with regional train schedules. One location matched consistently: a warehouse district on the outskirts of Raven Creek, an abandoned industrial zone with limited surveillance and low nighttime traffic. Authorities obtained a search warrant. What they found inside was deeply disturbing: a locked room, blackened walls, recording equipment, chairs bolted to the floor, microphones hanging from the ceiling, headphones, timers, sound meters. On one wall, a handwritten sentence: "Fear is the purest truth." The killer was not just committing crimes. He was conducting experiments, studying how fear evolves, how panic grows, how long a person can remain terrified before breaking. But the most unsettling discovery was a collection of labeled audio files. Each file named after a victim, each recording capturing fear, breathing, crying, begging. The predator was building an archive of terror, and investigators realized this case was far bigger than they imagined, because the killer wasn't planning to stop. He was perfecting his method. Criminal profilers were brought in to understand the psychology of the man behind the recordings. They concluded this killer was not driven by rage. He was driven by curiosity, control, and emotional power. He did not kill out of impulse. He planned, he observed, he experimented. To him, fear was not a side effect. Fear was the objective. Experts described him as highly intelligent, methodical, emotionally detached. He displayed traits of narcissism, psychopathy, and obsessive-compulsive behavior. He enjoyed control over another person's emotions, not physical dominance, psychological dominance. He needed to feel superior, invisible, untouchable. By studying fear, he felt powerful. Investigators reviewed hours of recovered recordings. The victims were never attacked immediately. Instead, they were spoken to, questioned, mentally worn down. The killer asked about childhood fears, nightmares, traumatic memories. He weaponized their own minds against them. He wanted them afraid, not because he hated them, but because their fear made him feel alive. One profiler said, the predator was not seeking victims. He was seeking reactions. The more terrified the victim, the more satisfied he became. But there was a weakness in his behavior. A pattern, born from arrogance. He believed he was smarter than law enforcement, and that belief would soon expose him, because the killer had begun leaving subtle signatures, tiny details, small habits, invisible to most people, but not to trained investigators. As detectives reviewed the crime scenes, they noticed a recurring detail that could not be ignored. At every location connected to the victims, a small, deliberate sign was left behind. Not a fingerprint, not DNA, a psychological signature, a handwritten note, a single sentence, always written in the same style. Fear reveals truth. The handwriting analysis revealed a consistent rhythm, measured spacing, controlled pressure. This was not impulsive writing. It was practiced, refined, intentional. The killer wanted to be recognized, not publicly, but intellectually. He wanted investigators to know they were chasing someone superior. Detectives traced the ink and paper type used in the notes, a rare brand, sold only in 3 specialty stores within the region. Surveillance footage from one store showed a man purchasing multiple notebooks, average height, well-groomed, calm posture, nothing suspicious at first glance, but his behavior stood out. He never rushed, he never hesitated, he moved with quiet confidence. Police ran facial recognition across local databases. Several matches appeared. One name kept resurfacing, a former psychology graduate student named Daniel Mercer. No criminal record, no violent history, no known threats. On paper, he seemed harmless, but when investigators reviewed his academic background, they found something unsettling. His thesis was titled, "The Human Response to Fear Under Control." The paper explored how fear can be induced, measured, and manipulated. Daniel Mercer was not just fascinated by fear, he was obsessed with it. And suddenly, the recordings, the notes, the methods, all began to make sense. But identifying him was only the beginning, because proving he was the killer would require something far more dangerous. They would have to enter his mind. Detectives began discreet surveillance on Daniel Mercer. By day, he appeared normal. He worked part-time as a private tutor, lived alone, kept a clean routine. Neighbors described him as polite, quiet, and intelligent. No one suspected anything dangerous, but investigators noticed something unusual. Daniel rarely socialized, rarely showed emotion, rarely reacted to stress. His daily routine was almost mechanical. He woke at the same time, walked the same routes, visited the same coffee shop. Inside his apartment, police found no visible chaos. Everything was organized, labeled, categorized. Books on psychology, behavioral science, criminal profiling, fear response theory. On his laptop, they discovered encrypted folders, hidden behind multiple passwords. After forensic decryption, they uncovered a disturbing archive. Audio recordings, matching those found in the warehouse. Victim timelines, emotional reaction charts, fear intensity rankings. He had rated victims based on how terrified they became. To Daniel Mercer, fear was data, not emotion. He kept a private journal. Inside it, one sentence stood out: fear is the most honest version of a human being. He believed terror stripped away lies, removed social masks, revealed truth. In his mind, he was not a criminal. He was a researcher, a scientist, studying the human psyche. But what shocked investigators most was an unfinished entry, a future plan, a new victim, already selected, a target, already chosen, and a date, fast approaching. Authorities realized they were running out of time. The predator was preparing to hunt again. Investigators analyzed Daniel Mercer's patterns to predict his next move. Every victim followed a schedule. Every action was deliberate, every fear studied in advance. By cross-referencing social media activity, late-night routines, and location data, police narrowed down potential targets. One name stood out: Claire Bennett, 24, a graduate student living alone in Raven Creek. Her online presence matched previous victims, late-night activity, a solitary lifestyle, high emotional expressiveness. Investigators began protecting her quietly, installing discreet surveillance around her apartment, monitoring phone activity, tracking unusual patterns. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer continued his preparation. Footage from his apartment showed him watching videos, studying the previous cases, practicing scenarios, timing responses, perfecting his method. He wasn't sloppy, he wasn't careless, He was meticulous. On the night he planned to approach Claire, he left home, carrying only a backpack, with equipment to monitor and manipulate. Investigators tracked him in real time. They knew his route. They knew his pace. They knew his intent. It was a race against time. And then, at 11:52 p.m., he arrived near Claire's building. Everything depended on split-second timing, but Mercer had overlooked one detail. One small human variable. The police were waiting, and the next encounter would change the course of the investigation forever. At 11:52 p.m., Daniel Mercer approached Claire Bennett's apartment. He moved silently, carrying his backpack of monitoring equipment. His plan was methodical, perfect, precise, but investigators had set up a perimeter. Hidden cameras, discreet tracking devices, a team ready to intervene. As Mercer reached the entrance, he paused, scanning the building, checking windows, observing patterns. Claire was home, unaware of the danger. She sat in her apartment, working on her laptop, completely alone. Mercer pulled out a small device. He intended to manipulate her fears, triggering panic before physical contact. But something went wrong. A sensor triggered, lights flashed, a quiet alarm reached the officers. Mercer froze. He hadn't anticipated this level of surveillance. The meticulous predator was now uncertain. Investigators moved closer, keeping distance but ready to act. Mercer tried to retreat, but his backpack snagged. Noise echoed in the empty street. At that moment, Claire noticed a shadow outside her window. Fear surged, but it was not enough to give Mercer control. The predator's plan unraveled in seconds. Every step calculated, every fear induced, was disrupted. Police closed in. Mercer realized his control was slipping. For the first time, he felt panic. He ran into the darkness of Raven Creek streets. The first major mistake of his criminal career was made in that split-second confrontation. And this error would lead investigators closer than ever to capturing the man who had haunted the town. After the confrontation near Claire Bennett's apartment, Daniel Mercer fled into the streets of Raven Creek. His movements were precise, but the police had already anticipated his escape routes. Surveillance cameras tracked him silently. Drones hovered above, capturing every turn. Officers coordinated quietly, staying just out of sight. Mercer ran through narrow alleys, hopping fences, ducking behind parked cars. His mind raced, calculating where he could hide, where fear could still be manipulated. But the predator had made a critical miscalculation. He underestimated the speed and coordination of the task force. Every street corner he passed was covered. Every alley had officers ready. Every exit monitored. Mercer tried to remain calm. He relied on his knowledge of human behavior, thinking he could outsmart them. But this wasn't a victim he was controlling. This was an entire investigative team, working together, anticipating his every move. He ducked into a narrow alley. Breathing heavily, he paused, listening, waiting, planning his next move. The psychological strain was evident. For the first time, the predator felt fear. His usual calm was breaking. Officers moved in silently from both ends. The net was closing. The predator realized that this time, his control was gone. The chase would not last long. And the moment of capture would reveal the true mind behind the terror that had gripped Raven Creek for months. Daniel Mercer was finally cornered in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Raven Creek. His calculated calm had vanished. For the first time, he showed signs of panic. Officers approached carefully, weapons holstered but ready. Negotiators attempted to speak. Mercer remained silent at first, staring at the shadows around him. Inside, the evidence of his obsession was everywhere. Monitors, audio devices, victim files, charts of fear responses. The predator's world, built on control and manipulation, was crumbling. Negotiators slowly drew him out, pointing to the futility of resistance. They emphasized the inevitability of his capture. Mercer finally surrendered. No struggle, no attempt to escape. In custody, he remained eerily calm, yet his eyes betrayed something deeper. A mind still fully calculating, still analyzing fear, even as he was being led away. Investigators noted that this was a unique arrest, a criminal of unparalleled intellect and psychological control, now powerless. But the case was far from over. Inside his apartment and devices were more clues than they could immediately process. Daniel Mercer sat alone in a dimly lit interrogation room. A single bulb cast long shadows across the walls. The air was heavy, silent, controlled. Detectives entered carefully, aware they were dealing with a highly intelligent mind. Daniel Mercer, the lead investigator, began. "We have all the evidence we need. The recordings, the victims, the notes. The pattern is clear. Why did you do it?" Mercer leaned back, folded his hands calmly. He spoke in a measured tone. "Fear is the purest form of truth. It strips away the masks humans wear. It reveals who they really are. I wanted to see that. I wanted to document it." Detectives pressed further, asking about his victims, the recordings, the warehouse, the upcoming target. Mercer explained methodically how he selected each victim, studied their behavior, and induced fear. Every word he spoke was cold, calculated, devoid of remorse. He described fear as a living entity, something he could interact with, measure, and control. Investigators noted his precise language, his analytical approach, and his complete detachment from human empathy. It was clear, Mercer did not see his crimes as wrong. He saw them as experiments. The interrogation revealed how deeply the obsession had consumed him, and how dangerous his mind truly was. The town of Raven Creek was shaken. Families feared for their safety. Neighbors looked at each other with suspicion. The quiet streets felt haunted. News outlets covered the case extensively. Headlines read, "Predator of Fear Captured, Raven Creek Serial Stalker, Psychologist Turned Killer Arrested." The community struggled to comprehend the horrors that had unfolded. Meanwhile, the legal system prepared for one of the most complex trials in the region's history. Daniel Mercer's defense team argued that he was conducting psychological research. They claimed his actions were experimental, not criminal. Prosecutors countered, presenting overwhelming evidence, victim testimonies, recordings, handwritten notes, and forensic data from the warehouse. Expert psychologists testified about Mercer's obsessive control over fear. They explained how victims were manipulated before any physical harm occurred. The trial revealed chilling details of the predator's meticulous planning, his obsession with terror, and his complete lack of empathy. Outside the courtroom, Raven Creek slowly began healing. Vigilance increased, neighbors became watchful, and the shadow of fear lingered. Long after Mercer's arrest, Daniel Mercer's mind became the subject of extensive study. Criminal psychologists analyzed his behavior, speech patterns, and methods. They concluded he was a highly organized predator, exhibiting traits of psychopathy, lack of empathy, superficial charm, manipulativeness, narcissism, obsession with superiority and control, obsessive-compulsive tendencies, meticulous planning and perfectionism. Mercer's crimes were not random. Every detail served a purpose. Every victim was a carefully chosen subject. Psychologists noted that Mercer derived pleasure from observing fear, rather than causing physical harm immediately. He measured terror like a scientist measures variables. For him, fear was data, and human reactions were experiments. Investigators also observed a pattern in his selection of victims: vulnerable emotional state, isolated lifestyle, consistent routines. Mercer's intelligence allowed him to evade suspicion. For months, he blended seamlessly into society, appearing normal and unremarkable. The profile concluded, Mercer was not impulsive. He was methodical, calculated, and dangerously obsessed. The victims of Daniel Mercer were more than statistics. Each had a life, dreams, and loved ones. Evan Carter, the first confirmed victim, was a talented graphic designer, with plans to start his own studio. Claire Bennett, nearly targeted, was a bright graduate student, working on her thesis, unaware of how close danger had been. Families described the emotional toll: constant fear, sleepless nights, and a lingering sense of violation. Neighbors reported changes in behavior, avoidance of late-night activities, anxiety, and paranoia. The ripple effect of Mercer's crimes extended far beyond the direct victims. The town of Raven Creek felt the psychological weight. Support groups formed, counselors provided therapy, community meetings emphasized vigilance. Even after Mercer's arrest, he continued to haunt their memories. Photos, recordings, and personal data had left lasting impressions. Experts explained that the trauma inflicted was not just physical, it was mental, it was psychological, and in some cases, it would never fully heal. The investigation into Daniel Mercer's crimes prompted law enforcement agencies to rethink how they approached psychological predators. Detectives and profilers reviewed every step, from early warning signs to the capture. They developed new protocols for monitoring digital behavior, especially for potential stalking cases. Training programs were updated, recognizing subtle patterns of manipulation, identifying psychological signatures left by predators, coordinating surveillance without alerting suspects. Cyber units began collaborating closely with local police, tracking online activity, location patterns, and communication habits. Mercer's case also highlighted the importance of early intervention. Neighbors, friends, and family were encouraged to report unusual behaviors before they escalated into crimes. Forensic teams implemented more advanced methods for analyzing audio recordings, tracking behavioral patterns, and uncovering hidden clues. The case became a textbook example for profiling organized predators. It changed investigative approaches across the United States, emphasizing that intelligence, patience, and observation can be as crucial as physical evidence. The investigation into Daniel Mercer's crimes prompted law enforcement agencies to rethink how they approached psychological predators. Detectives and profilers reviewed every step, from early warning signs to the capture. They developed new protocols for monitoring digital behavior, especially for potential stalking cases. Training programs were updated, recognizing subtle patterns of manipulation, identifying psychological signatures left by predators, coordinating surveillance without alerting suspects. Cyber units began collaborating closely with local police, tracking online activity, location patterns, and communication habits. Mercer's case also highlighted the importance of early intervention. Neighbors, friends, and family were encouraged to report unusual behaviors before they escalated into crimes. Forensic teams implemented more advanced methods for analyzing audio recordings, tracking behavioral patterns, and uncovering hidden clues. The case became a textbook example for profiling organized predators. It changed investigative approaches across the United States, emphasizing that intelligence, patience, and observation can be as crucial as physical evidence. After his arrest, Daniel Mercer was transferred to a high-security facility. Isolation cells were chosen to limit his interaction with others, to prevent him from influencing or manipulating anyone. Even in confinement, Mercer remained composed. He spent hours meticulously organizing his cell, writing notes about human behavior, and analyzing the psychological profiles of investigators. Prison psychologists observed his behavior closely. They noted high intelligence and adaptability, obsessive attention to detail, ability to remain calm under stress. Despite isolation, he attempted to exert control through subtle psychological tactics. He would engage guards in conversation, testing their patience, their responses, their fear. Mercer also requested reading material on criminal psychology and human behavior, continuing his study of fear even behind bars. Officials described him as calmly dangerous, a man fully aware of his crimes, yet detached from remorse. His incarceration became a case study in managing highly intelligent psychological predators, as prison staff learned how to maintain security while preventing mental manipulation. The trial of Daniel Mercer captured national attention. Media outlets covered every development. The courtroom was filled with tension as the full scope of his crimes was revealed. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, audio recordings of victims' fear, handwritten notes with psychological signatures, digital tracking data and encrypted files, witness testimonies from near victims and families. The defense attempted to argue that Mercer's actions were scientific research, a controlled study of human behavior. They claimed he had no intent to physically harm. However, expert witnesses refuted these claims. Psychologists detailed how Mercer's methods caused extreme psychological trauma. They explained the calculated manipulation, the obsession with inducing fear, and the premeditated selection of victims. Evidence from his apartment and the warehouse painted a chilling portrait of a mind consumed by obsession. During cross-examination, Mercer remained composed, calm, detached, yet every word he spoke revealed an unsettling intelligence, a deep understanding of fear, and a disturbing lack of empathy. The jury listened intently, aware that they were judging a man who had terrorized a small town through meticulous psychological control. After weeks of intense testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 days. The evidence against Daniel Mercer was overwhelming. Every piece of data, every recording, every psychological pattern pointed to a meticulously planned series of crimes. The verdict was clear: guilty on all counts. During sentencing, the courtroom was silent. Families of the victims sat in stunned silence, relieved that justice was served, yet still haunted by the trauma inflicted. The judge described Mercer as highly intelligent, extremely dangerous, obsessively fixated on fear, a persistent threat to society. Mercer received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. The court emphasized the need to protect the public from someone capable of such calculated psychological manipulation. Outside the courthouse, news anchors reported the verdict live. The town of Raven Creek slowly exhaled, relieved that the predator was behind bars, but scarred forever by his crimes. The capture and conviction of Daniel Mercer sent shockwaves across the United States. Law enforcement agencies began studying the case. To understand how highly intelligent predators operate, new protocols were implemented. Early identification of psychological stalking patterns, enhanced digital monitoring of high-risk behaviors, improved collaboration between local and federal agencies. Training programs emphasized the importance of subtle behavioral clues, psychological signatures, and patterns of fear manipulation. The case also highlighted the need for community awareness. Families were encouraged to report unusual online behavior and signs of stalking before it escalated. Victims and their families received ongoing psychological support. Counselors focused on trauma recovery, teaching coping mechanisms, and rebuilding trust in their communities. The psychological scars remained. The memory of fear, manipulation, and loss was deeply embedded. Yet, the case of Daniel Mercer became a benchmark, a dark lesson in understanding human psychology, fear, and the extreme lengths to which some minds can go. The story of Daniel Mercer and the terror he inflicted on Raven Creek has come to an official end, but the lessons remain. Law enforcement agencies across the country use this case as a study in identifying and stopping psychologically manipulative predators. Psychologists emphasize understanding human behavior is crucial. Subtle signs of stalking and obsession cannot be ignored. Early intervention can save lives. The victims' families continue to heal, but the memory of fear and loss lingers. Community programs were strengthened to promote awareness and safety. Daniel Mercer remains behind bars, isolated, observed, and stripped of the ability to manipulate further. Criminal minds like his are rare, but their impact is profound. The case teaches us that vigilance, intelligence, and careful observation are essential in protecting the vulnerable. Raven Creek slowly recovered, but the shadows of fear remain, as a reminder of what can happen when control and obsession intersect. The story of Daniel Mercer is not just a tale of horror. It is a lesson in human psychology, the dangers of obsession, and the resilience of communities in the face of darkness. End of case file number 001.